Stacy's fingers closed around Sun Jae-hyun's silk tie, forcing his head down, forcing him to look at her instead of the sniper's scope. "Don't look up," she whispered. "There's a sniper at 2 o'clock. Your driver just signaled him. Kiss me or you die." His hand came up to the back of her neck. Then the glass exploded where his head had been 3 seconds before. 11 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, and the Obsidian's entrance smelled like wet pavement mixing with something Stacy Douglas couldn't name but recognized as expensive. Cedarwood, maybe? Or leather worn soft with age? Or the particular scent of money so old it had stopped trying to prove anything. The kind of smell that clung to men who owned cities instead of living in them, who moved through the world like gravity bent differently around their bodies. Stacy stood by the heavy glass door she'd just opened, shivering slightly in the damp air that carried the smell of rain and exhaust, and the particular electricity of a city that never slept. Sun Jae-hyun paused on the threshold, not walking out yet, just standing there checking his phone, his profile sharp enough to cut against the warm gold light spilling from the Obsidian's interior. At 36, he carried himself with the kind of absolute stillness that made noise feel like a threat, that made movement seem vulgar and unnecessary. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. All angles and clean lines that suggested genetics and good bone structure, and probably a childhood where weakness was culled early. Dark eyes that reflected light without seeming to absorb it, as if even photons knew better than to linger. Hair styled with the kind of casual precision that took either significant money or natural gift, probably both. The rain had dampened it slightly at the temples, making it look darker than the black it already was. His suit was bespoke. She could tell by the way it fit his shoulders, by the way it moved with him rather than against him. Men like him, men whose names made other men lower their voices and glance toward the exits, men who carried violence like a tailored suit, rarely acknowledged service staff. She'd learned that in her first week, had learned to read the micro-expressions that telegraphed mood and danger, had learned which patrons were simply wealthy and which ones were dangerous, had learned the difference between power that was inherited and power that was taken with blood and maintained with fear. That's when Stacy saw it. Through the glass door, in the reflection created by the interior lights against the rain-dark street, she could see the curb behind him. The driver, Minho. She'd learned his name in week 2, had heard Jae-hyun address him with the casual warmth reserved for family rather than employees. 5 years with the Gumryong Syndicate, according to the kitchen gossip that circulated through the Obsidian staff like currency. Left-handed. She'd noticed that immediately because her father had been left-handed, and she'd learned young to track which hand held the bottle, which hand would swing first. Except right now, in this exact moment, Minho was checking his watch with his right hand. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a prisoner testing bars, like something trapped and desperate trying to claw its way free. The movement was wrong, deliberate. Not the casual glance of someone checking time, but the specific, choreographed gesture of someone sending a signal. A signal she'd only seen once before, in a different life, from a different desperate man who'd been compromised and controlled and forced to choose between loyalties. Then she caught the flash. Microscopic, barely there, a glint of red light dancing across Minho's cufflinks. Expensive platinum things that caught the city lights, before disappearing into the rain-soaked darkness. Laser sight. Not on Jae-hyun, on the driver himself. Confirmation signal. The sniper was waiting, watching. The spotter, Minho, had just confirmed the target was in position. In approximately 3 seconds, maybe 4, a bullet would travel through the space where Jae-hyun's head would be the moment he stepped fully outside. The glass door was bulletproof, but only to a point. The Obsidian was exclusive, not paranoid. The glass would slow the round. Maybe, but not stop it. Not at this range, not with the kind of weapon that required a laser sight at 50 meters. Stacy's mind raced through options with the speed of someone who'd learned young that thinking too long meant dying too slow. If she shouted, the sniper would fire immediately. If she grabbed Jae-hyun, his security would shoot her before her hands made contact. If she did nothing, she'd watch a man's head explode 3 feet in front of her and spend the rest of her life wondering if she could have stopped it. She needed a reason to be in his personal space. Immediately. A reason that looked innocent to a sniper watching through a scope 5 blocks away. That wouldn't trigger his security team into protective violence. that would give her exactly enough time to whisper a warning without alerting anyone to the fact that she'd seen something wrong. She stepped forward, blocking his path to the curb, and reached for his collar with hands that refused to shake despite the adrenaline singing through her blood like electricity. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice pitched to that perfect register of professional deference she'd practiced until it became automatic, as her fingers closed around the silk of his tie. The fabric was cool and smooth against her skin, expensive in ways she could feel in the weave. Egyptian silk, probably. The kind that cost more per yard than she made in a week. Jae-hyun froze. His dark eyes snapped to hers, not looking through her anymore but at her, really seeing her for the first time. Cold, calculating, promising violence for the insolence of touching him without permission. Men like him didn't let strangers into their personal space. Especially not waitresses. Especially not when they were thinking about other things. His security team shifted. She could see them in her peripheral vision, hands moving toward weapons concealed beneath expensive suits. Stacy didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, she adjusted the Windsor knot with practiced efficiency, tightening it slightly, forcing him to tilt his head down to accommodate her hands, forcing his skull out of the direct line of fire. Using the intimacy of the gesture, the way it looked like a girlfriend straightening her man's appearance, or a valet performing a final check, as camouflage for what she was really doing, getting close enough to whisper. "Don't look up," she breathed, her lips barely moving, voice pitched so low it was almost subvocal, pretending to smooth the tie flat against his chest. "There's a sniper at 2 o'clock. Your driver just signaled him." Jae-hyun's entire body went rigid beneath her hands, every muscle locking into place like a machine receiving contradictory commands. But he didn't move, didn't look up, didn't do anything that would alert the sniper that the target had been warned. The anger in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by the calculating intensity of a predator who just realized he'd walked into a trap and was now deciding how to kill his way back out. His eyes searched hers, looking for deception, for madness, for any reason to dismiss what she'd just said. She held his gaze steadily, let him see the truth written in her expression, let him understand that she wasn't joking or confused or insane. She smoothed the lapel of his jacket, a lover's gesture, or maybe just an overly attentive service worker fussing over a VIP client. To anyone watching, it would look innocent, natural, unremarkable. Her voice dropped even lower, barely breath shaped into words. "Kiss me, or you die." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. For one suspended moment, eternal and instantaneous, lasting forever and no time at all, the rain seemed to stop falling. The street sounds faded into white noise. There was only the space between them. The choice he had to make in the time it took a finger to squeeze a trigger. The calculation of whether to trust a stranger or die doubting. He understood. She could see it in his eyes. The exact moment he processed what she was really saying. That the kiss wasn't about romance or attraction or power. It was tactics, geometry, a way to move his body, to change his angle, to put him somewhere other than where the sniper expected him to be. Then his hand came up to the back of her neck. His fingers were warm against her skin, calloused in ways that suggested he didn't just order violence but participated in it. The pressure was firm but not cruel, controlled but not gentle. She could feel each individual fingertip, could feel the way his thumb pressed against the pulse point below her ear, where her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could feel it, could count it, could understand exactly how terrified she was underneath the calm. Then his mouth crashed against hers. It wasn't romantic, wasn't tender, wasn't any of the things kisses were supposed to be in movies or books or the fantasies she'd stopped allowing herself to have. It was geometry, angular, strategic, a calculated pivot of mass and momentum. She used the angle of his head, the way his mouth covered hers, the way his body leaned forward, to rotate them both, her hands on his shoulders, pushing and pulling simultaneously, using his own weight against him, forcing him 2 steps to the left and back against the bronze pillar that held up the obsidian's Art Deco canopy. The glass door exploded. The sound came after the impact. A millisecond delay that made no sense until you remembered that bullets moved faster than sound, that you were dead before you heard the shot that killed you. The bulletproof panel failed catastrophically where Jae-hyun's skull had been seconds before. the impact point staring outward in a perfect radial pattern before the entire pane dissolved into a shower of safety glass that fell like frozen rain. The world erupted into chaos, screaming. Someone inside the obsidian, a woman in diamonds and terror, shrieking at a pitch that made Stacy's ears hurt, shouting in Korean and English and what might have been Russian, all of it overlapping into a wall of noise. Car alarms triggering in sympathetic response to the sound. The screech of tires as vehicles that had been idling at the curb suddenly accelerated. Engines roaring. Drivers making the split-second calculation that whatever was happening wasn't their problem and getting away was more important than understanding. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you leave here helps us keep unraveling these dangerous love stories and high-stakes betrayals together. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and get ready. Let's begin. Jae-hyun's security erupted from inside the building and from the vehicles parked along the street. Men in dark suits moving with the fluid precision of military training, weapons appearing in hands with the speed of practice, bodies positioning to create a defensive perimeter. She could hear them shouting coordinates, calling out threats, switching between languages like code switching was second nature. But Jae-hyun was still pressed against her, still holding the back of her neck, still close enough that she could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could feel each rapid breath against her cheek, could see the exact moment his brain caught up with what had just happened. "The driver," he said, his voice absolutely level despite the chaos, despite the fact that someone had just tried to kill him, despite everything. "Where is he?" Stacy's eyes found the curb. Minho was on the ground, zip ties already securing his wrists behind his back, two of Jae-hyun's security team holding him down with the efficient brutality of men who'd done this before. The driver was weeping. She could see his shoulders shaking, could see the way his face pressed against the wet pavement. "Alive," she managed, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Your men have him." Jae-hyun's eyes were black ice as he looked past her to assess the scene. She watched him process everything, the shattered glass, the security team establishing a perimeter, the civilians fleeing, the driver in custody, with the speed of someone who'd survived by making faster calculations than the people trying to kill him. Then his eyes came back to her, really looked at her for the first time. Not through her, at her, seeing her not as furniture or function but as a person who'd just saved his life, who'd seen a signal that had taken his own security team by surprise, who'd grabbed his tie and forced him to kiss her and used that kiss as a tactical maneuver that had moved him exactly 2 feet and 180 degrees, which was the difference between alive and dead. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice soft and dangerous and genuinely curious. Before Stacy could answer, one of his men, the broad-shouldered one with scars mapping his knuckles, appeared at Jae-hyun's elbow. "Hyung-nim, we need to move. Now. The sniper is still out there, and we don't know if there's a secondary position." Jae-hyun's hand was still on the back of her neck. His thumb moved slightly, a small circle against her skin that sent electricity down her spine. "She comes with us. Boss? She's a civilian." She saw the signal. His voice dropped into something that expected obedience. "She's the only reason I'm alive right now. She comes with us, or I'm not moving." The security man's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The Mercedes. 30 seconds. Then Jae-hyun was moving, his hand sliding from her neck to her wrist, his grip firm but not painful as he pulled her away from the shattered entrance of the obsidian, away from the crime scene that was already forming, witnesses being herded by security, police sirens beginning their distant wail, the manager of the obsidian appearing in the doorway with an expression that suggested this was very bad for business. Stacy's mind was racing. She should run, should pull away, should disappear into the crowd and never look back, should return to being nobody, to being invisible, to being safe in the anonymity she'd worked so hard to cultivate. But Jae-hyun's hand on her wrist felt like an anchor, like a tether to something that was either salvation or damnation, and she couldn't tell which yet. The Mercedes was sleek and black, and the back door was already open. Jae-hyun pushed her inside first, not roughly, but with the clear expectation of compliance, and slid in after her. The door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering and bulletproof reinforcement. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil and something else that might have been fear, though whether it was hers or someone else's she couldn't tell. Rain hammered the roof in staccato percussion that matched the frantic rhythm of her pulse. Each drop felt deliberate, accusing, as if the weather itself was bearing witness to what she'd just done. Across from her in the darkness, Jae-hyun sat with the supernatural stillness of a blade waiting to be drawn from its sheath. His phone cast cold blue light across the sharp geography of his face. High cheekbones that could have been carved with a straight razor, a jaw that looked like it had never known softness, shadows pooling in the hollows beneath his eyes like bruises. She could see blood drying in the creases of his knuckles, dark and rust-colored, from where he dragged her through the shattered remains of the obsidian's entrance. He hadn't asked if she was hurt. Men like him, men whose names made other men lower their voices and check the exits, didn't ask questions they already knew the answers to. And he'd watched her move through broken glass without flinching, had felt her hands steady on his tie even as a bullet destroyed the air where his head had been seconds before. The driver was new, younger than Minho by at least a decade, with hands that trembled visibly on the steering wheel and sweat beading at his temples despite the air conditioning. He took corners like he was trying to outrun death itself, tires screaming against wet asphalt. Maybe he was running from death. Maybe they all were. Stacy's fingers were still trembling, a delayed reaction she couldn't quite suppress. She clasped them together in her lap, pressing hard enough that her knuckles went white. She could still feel the texture of Jae-hyun's tie against her palms, could still feel his pulse jackrabbiting beneath the expensive fabric in the split second before his mouth had crashed against hers. The kiss had tasted like rain and fury and something else she refused to name, something dark and electric that had nothing to do with survival, and everything to do with the way his hand had tightened on the back of her neck. Strategic. It had been strategic, geometry and survival instinct and tactical positioning. Nothing more, but her lips still burned where his had been, and her body still remembered the heat of him, the solid weight of his chest against hers, the way he'd moved them both with calculated precision that somehow felt like choreography they'd practiced in some other lifetime. Where are we going? Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was its own small victory. Queens. He didn't look up from his phone, his thumb scrolling through what looked like security camera feeds. You'll stay there until I determine what to do with you. Not a request, not a suggestion. A statement of fact delivered in a voice like smoke over broken glass. Soft and rough and utterly without compromise. Stacy's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She'd spent 3 years learning how to disappear, how to become the kind of nobody that powerful people forgot existed the moment they stopped looking. 3 years of waitressing and cleaning and keeping her head down and her observations to herself. 3 years of being invisible. One whispered warning. One tactical kiss. And she dragged herself back into the exact world she'd burned to escape. The rain intensified, turning the city into a watercolor painting viewed through a car window, lights bleeding into streaks, buildings losing their edges, everything dissolving into impressionistic violence. Stacy watched Manhattan disappear behind them and felt something in her chest constrict. This was a mistake. This was a fatal mistake. She should have stayed silent, should have let the sniper take his shot, should have remained nobody and safe and far away from men who kissed like warfare. 23 minutes later, she counted, because counting kept panic at bay. They pulled up to a brownstone that looked like abandonment given architectural form. Cracked concrete steps leading to a door that hung slightly crooked in its frame. Windows dark as closed eyes. Glass so dirty it was opaque. Graffiti tags layered like scar tissue on the brick facade. The kind of place where screams wouldn't carry past the walls, where neighbors had learned not to ask questions, where bodies could disappear without the inconvenience of police reports. Jae-hyun exited the vehicle with fluid grace, his movements economical and precise. He gestured her out with a tilt of his head, his hand coming to rest on the weapon she could now see clearly outlined beneath his jacket. The gun looked like an extension of him. Natural, expected, as much a part of his anatomy as his hands. Stacy's legs felt unsteady as she stepped onto cracked pavement. Her waitress uniform, black slacks and white button-down that had seemed professional 6 hours ago, was torn at the shoulder, spotted with blood that might have been hers or his or the sniper's. She couldn't tell anymore. Glass dust glittered in her hair like broken diamonds. Inside, the air tasted like dust and old secrets, and the particular smell of places where bad things had happened, and no one had bothered to clean up the evidence. Minimal furniture occupied the front room. A scarred wooden table that looked like it had survived interrogations. 2 chairs that didn't match. A couch bleeding yellow foam stuffing from knife wounds in its upholstery. Water damage stained the ceiling in abstract patterns that looked disturbingly organic. The single overhead bulb cast shadows that moved like living things, turning innocuous corners into potential threats. Jae-hyun moved through the space with the confidence of someone who knew every creak in the floorboards, every shadow, every exit. He went directly to the far wall where a crooked painting of the Brooklyn Bridge hung at eye level. The kind of mass-produced art that decorated cheap motels. His fingers found the frame's edge and swung it aside to reveal a wall safe. The combination spun beneath his fingers with practiced ease, each click deliberate and sure. When he turned back, he held a manila envelope thick enough to choke on. The kind of envelope that represented life-changing amounts of money or death warrants, depending on which side of it you were standing. $50,000. He placed it on the table between them with the delicate care of someone handling a loaded weapon. Take it. Disappear. Change your name. Leave the state. Forget tonight happened. His tone suggested this was routine, that he paid people to forget him the way other men tipped valets. That human memory could be purchased like any other commodity. Stacy stared at the envelope. She could see the edges of $100 bills through the paper. Could imagine what $50,000 meant. First and last month's rent somewhere far away. A new identity. Enough cushion to start over properly this time. Safety. Anonymity. Survival. Then she thought about the pattern she'd seen in Minho's movements. The wrong-handed watch check. The laser sight reflection. The specific choreography of assassination. Someone had taught him those signals. Someone was watching. Someone had access to security protocols and safe houses, and the intimate knowledge of how Jae-hyun thought. She reached past the envelope, slowly, telegraphing every movement so he wouldn't interpret it as a threat, and let her fingers close around the burner phone, sitting beside his car keys. What are you? The phone came apart in her hands like she'd been dismantling surveillance devices her whole life. Back panel off with her thumbnail, finding the release catch. Battery extracted with the efficiency of practice. SIM card popped free and set aside. She arranged the 3 pieces in a neat line on the table, each component a punctuation mark in a sentence he wasn't understanding yet. Then she stood, smooth and unhurried. Jae-hyun's hand moved toward his weapon. Didn't draw it, just touched it. Fingers resting on the grip. Thumb near the safety. A reminder that he could, that the space between intention and execution was measured in fractions of seconds. Stacy walked to the heating vent near the baseboard, her Waitress flats silent on the warped floorboards. She knelt, painfully aware of how vulnerable the position made her, aware of his eyes tracking every movement like a predator watching prey, and reached into the grate. The metal was cold against her fingers, rough with old paint and rust. Her hand found what she was looking for almost immediately. When she straightened, she held a small magnetic tracker between her thumb and forefinger. The LED pulsed red like a tiny mechanical heartbeat. Current model. Expensive. The kind that intelligence agencies used, not street-level criminals. There are 2 more, she said calmly, setting the device beside the disassembled phone. One in the couch lining, left side, about 8 inches deep. One behind the smoke detector, attached to the battery compartment. The silence that followed had weight, texture, physical presence. She could feel Jae-hyun's focus narrow and intensify until the room seemed to shrink around them, until there was only him and her and the implications of what she'd just revealed. The air felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning struck. This isn't a safe house, Stacy continued, turning to face him fully. His expression had gone beyond cold into something arctic, a blankness that was somehow more terrifying than rage because it suggested calculation without emotion, decisions being made that involved permanent solutions. This is a kill box. Whoever sent that sniper knew you'd bring me here. They've been watching your contingency plans for months, maybe longer. They know your routines. They know your safe houses. They know how you think, how you move, how you react under pressure. She watched the muscles in his jaw work beneath the skin, watched him recalculate every assumption he'd made about the waitress who'd grabbed his tie outside the obsidian, watched the exact moment he stopped seeing her as a civilian liability and started seeing her as something else entirely. "Who are you?" His voice was soft, gentle even. That's what made it dangerous. Stacy's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her chin up, kept her hands loose at her sides where he could see them, kept her posture open despite every instinct screaming at her to assume a defensive position. 3 years ago, I was a forensic accountant for the O'Malley crime family. The words came out steady, factual, stripped of the emotion that still lived in them like shrapnel. They hired me through a recruiting firm that specialized in placing financial professionals with unique discretion requirements. The job was simple: clean up irregularities in their offshore accounts, make the books look legitimate enough to pass IRS scrutiny, route money through enough shells and corporations that the origin became impossible to trace. Jae-hyun had gone very, very still. The kind of preternatural stillness that preceded violence or revelation. The irregularities weren't mistakes, she continued. They were theft. $7.3 million missing over 4 years, systematically siphoned off by the underboss, Patrick O'Malley's cousin, and his mistress. They'd created an entire parallel financial structure within the family's legitimate operations. It was brilliant, actually. The kind of embezzlement that took real sophistication to pull off. She paused, remembering the moment she'd first seen the pattern in the numbers. The way certain accounts bled money in amounts just small enough to avoid triggering automated alerts. The way the transactions happened during times of high operational activity when scrutiny was minimal. "I didn't report it to them first," she said quietly. "I went directly to the FBI. Handed them everything. Routing numbers, account passwords, documented proof of RICO violations going back a decade. Wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, tax evasion. I gave them a complete roadmap to dismantling the entire O'Malley empire." She gestured at the envelope of cash like it was pocket change, meaningless in context. The O'Malleys collapsed in 6 weeks. Federal seizures of every property, every account, every asset. Indictments rolling out like dominoes. The empire they'd spent 3 generations building burned to ash because I remembered numbers and had enough evidence to make them stick. Her eyes met his. "The FBI gave me immunity in exchange for testimony. The cartel put $3 million on my head anyway, because I didn't just destroy the O'Malleys. I proved that the financial architecture of organized crime was vulnerable, that accountants could be more dangerous than assassins." She let that sink in for a moment. "So I disappeared into the best hiding place in the world. To service work. No one looks at waitresses. No one remembers the woman who brings drinks and holds doors and adjusts ties. We're furniture. Wallpaper. Perfect invisibility." Her voice dropped. "But I remember everything. I see patterns. I notice when things don't fit. And your driver's signal tonight? That's called a dead man's confirmation. The sniper doesn't shoot until they receive that specific tell from a spotter. It's a 2-person operation designed to ensure the target is exactly where they need to be before pulling the trigger." Jae-hyun moved. 3 steps that closed the distance between them until she could smell everything about him. The gunpowder embedded deep in the fabric of his clothes, the rain still drying in his hair. The cologne that had seemed merely expensive at the obsidian, and now just smelled like danger wearing a civilized mask. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar tissue on his knuckles that suggested years of violence, the way his pupils had dilated slightly as she spoke. "The auditor," he said slowly, tasting the legend on his tongue like wine. "The woman who destroyed the O'Malleys from the inside. The ghost story that criminal accountants tell to scare each other. That was you. Not a question. An identification. Like he'd just placed a face to a myth." "I'm trying very hard to be no one now," Stacy corrected, even though her heart was trying to escape through her ribs and her breathing had gone shallow. "Too late for that." His voice dropped to something almost intimate, almost gentle, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Someone in my organization gave up my routes, my schedule, my security protocols, the locations of my safe houses. That takes access at the highest level. That takes time to gather intelligence. That takes someone I trust." He shifted closer, still not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, could track the rise and fall of his chest, close enough that if she took a deep breath, her own chest would brush against his. "You said there are 2 more trackers." "Yes. Show me." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered in a voice that expected obedience. Stacy moved to the couch, hyper-aware of him following at a distance that felt simultaneously too close and not close enough. She pushed her hand into the torn upholstery, feeling past the disintegrating foam, rough and crumbling, until her fingers closed around smooth plastic. The second tracker came free with a sound like tearing fabric, bringing with it a small cloud of dust and old cigarette smell. The smoke detector required a chair. She dragged one over, wood scraping against wood in a sound that made her teeth ache, and climbed up. Again, painfully aware of how exposed this made her. How vulnerable. Her back to a trained killer, her hands occupied, her balance precarious. She dismantled the smoke detector's cover with practiced efficiency, reached into the battery compartment, and extracted the third tracker. This one was smaller, more sophisticated, newer technology. When she climbed down, Jae-hyun was holding his phone, photographing each device from multiple angles. His expression had shifted into something calculating and cold. The mask firmly back in place, but she'd seen beneath it for just a moment. Had seen the flash of something that might have been respect. "They've been watching me for months," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Mapping my movements, learning my patterns, building a complete profile." His eyes lifted to hers, and in them she saw the terrible clarity of someone realizing just how thoroughly they'd been compromised. "You found 3 trackers in under 5 minutes. How?" "Because I know how hunters think." Stacy set the last tracker on the table with the others, forming a small constellation of betrayal. "I was prey for 2 years. You learn to see the invisible infrastructure of surveillance. You learn to notice what doesn't belong. You develop a 6th sense for the feeling of being watched." She met his gaze. "You learn that paranoia isn't mental illness when they're actually out to kill you." His phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Each vibration seemed to drain something from his expression. Not fear, but something colder. Resignation, maybe. Or recognition of an inevitability he'd been trying to avoid. He looked at the screen, and for the first time since she'd grabbed his tie outside the obsidian, Stacy saw the mask crack completely. Not fear. Something worse. Something that looked like grief anticipating itself. "Minho is ready," he said quietly. "The driver. The one who'd signaled the sniper. The one Jae-hyun's security had dragged away while Stacy was bleeding from glass cuts she hadn't noticed until the adrenaline faded and her hands started shaking. And?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "We need to leave. Now." The industrial basement smelled like rust and old blood and terror condensed into something almost breathable, almost substantial enough to choke on. Stacy stood in the shadows at the edge of where the overhead light's reach gave up against darkness. Her arms wrapped tight around herself against a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the weight of what was about to happen. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness with metronomic precision. Slow, steady, inevitable. Each drop felt like a countdown to something that couldn't be stopped, only survived. Minho was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the concrete floor, his face a canvas of bruises painted in shades of purple and red and sickly yellow-green. Blood had crusted beneath his nose, and in the corner of his mouth where someone had split his lip. His hands, bound tight behind the chair, had gone bone-white from restricted circulation, but his eyes held something so much worse than physical pain. Terror, raw and animal, and guilt that looked like it was eating him from the inside out. And underneath it all, a desperate, drowning love that made Stacy's chest ache with recognition. Jae-hyun stood in front of him, perfectly still in that way that suggested violence held in suspension. He'd removed his jacket somewhere between the safe house and here, had rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows with methodical precision. The single overhead bulb, swinging slightly on its cord, stirred by air currents that smelled like mildew and decay, cast harsh shadows across his face, turning him into something carved from obsidian and controlled fury. His hands hung loose at his sides, but Stacy could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed slightly, as if remembering the weight of weapons. "You signaled him." His voice was gentle. almost tender. That's what made it absolutely terrifying. The sniper outside the obsidian. You checked your watch with your right hand. Hyung Nim. Minho's voice cracked on the honorific, breaking into something that sounded like a sob being swallowed. Please. I can explain. Then explain. Jae-hyun crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the driver, his movements fluid and controlled. You've been with me for 5 years. You were at my father's funeral. You held me up when I could barely stand. You drove my mother to the hospital when she had her stroke, ran every red light getting there. You've saved my life twice. He paused, and the silence felt like a physical pressure. Your family, Minho. My brother in everything but blood. And tonight, you signaled a sniper to put a bullet through my skull. The words hung in the air like razor wire. Sharp, thin, capable of drawing blood just by existing. I didn't want to, Minho whispered. Tears cut clean tracks through the blood and grime coating his face, making him look younger than his 32 years. I swear to you, Hyung Nim. I swear on my father's grave I never wanted. They have Ji-yeon. They took my sister. They said they'd kill her if I didn't. Who? The word came out soft as silk being drawn over steel. Give me names. I don't know their names. I never saw their faces. Minho was speaking faster now, the words tumbling out like confession, like prayer, like last rites. Just phone calls, always different numbers, different voices, instructions delivered like they were reading from a script. They knew things. Hyung Nim. They knew about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. They knew about the shipping routes through Vancouver. They knew about your mother's medication schedule and where you buy your suits and the name of the woman you had drinks with last Tuesday. His voice broke completely. They knew about Ji-yeon's diabetes. Type 1. Insulin dependent. They knew she needs injections every 6 hours or her blood sugar crashes, and she goes into shock. They sent me a photo. His breathing was coming in ragged gasps now, hyperventilating toward panic. They sent me a photo of her tied to a chair in a room I didn't recognize. There was a timer on the wall behind her, counting down. They said if I didn't signal, if I hesitated even for a second, they'd let that timer run out and they'd let her die. They said they'd make me listen on the phone while she begged for insulin they weren't going to give her. Stacy's stomach turned to ice. This was how you weaponized loyalty. Not by buying it with money or power, but by taking hostage the one thing that mattered. More than honor. More than life. By making love itself into a weapon pointed at the person who felt it. One of Jae-hyun's men, a broad-shouldered enforcer named Tae-min, with scars mapping the geography of his knuckles like a career written in scar tissue, stepped forward from the shadows. His hand rested on his weapon, casual but ready. Want me to finish him, boss? Make it quick? No. Jae-hyun stood slowly, his expression unreadable as carved stone. Minho, look at me. The driver lifted his head with visible effort, as if his neck could barely support the weight of his skull. The grief in his eyes was unbearable to witness, the kind of anguish that came from having to choose which person you loved would die. Where is Ji-yeon now? I don't know. Minho's voice was barely a whisper. They said after tonight, after you were dead, they'd release her. That was the deal. That was what they promised. His breathing was ragged, labored. But it's worse than that. Hyung Nim. It's so much worse. They knew you'd capture me. They knew you'd bring me here. They planned for this. They wanted this. Something about the way he said it, the tone, the resignation, the terrible finality, made every instinct Stacy had honed during 2 years of running from death start screaming inside her skull. Minho, she said, stepping forward from the shadows before she could reconsider the wisdom of drawing attention to herself. What did they do to you? His eyes found hers, the waitress who'd saved the man he'd been ordered to kill, the stranger who'd seen the signal he'd spent 3 days praying no one would notice. She saw understanding pass between them like an electric current, the recognition shared by 2 people who'd been caught in machinery too large to escape, too powerful to fight, too inexorable to stop. I'm so sorry, he whispered, and his bound hands fumbled behind his back, fingers catching on fabric. Then his entire body jerked forward, and he began ripping at the buttons of his shirt with his chin, with his teeth, with desperate, violent determination. No, Jae-hyun said, comprehension flooding his face like ice water. his voice suddenly sharp and urgent. "Minho, don't show me." But it was too late. The driver ripped his shirt open with a violence born of absolute desperation and the need to confess. Strapped across his chest, secured with layer upon layer of industrial tape that wrapped around his torso like gray mummy wrappings, was a vest. Not tactical gear, not body armor, not anything that would save a life. C4. Blocks of it, maybe 2 kilograms, wired into a circuit board that looked professionally installed, and in the center, glowing red in the dim light like a malevolent eye, an LED display, 043, 042, 041. The numbers counted down with mechanical indifference. "They put it on me 3 days ago," Minho said, his voice suddenly steady with the calm that came after panic had burned itself out. "Tuesday morning. 2 men in masks. They strapped me to a table in my own apartment, and they put this on me, and they said if I tried to remove it, it would detonate. Motion sensors, tamper switches. If I told you about it, they'd know. They said they were listening, always listening, and it would detonate. If you didn't die tonight." His eyes filled with fresh tears. "This was always a suicide mission, Hyungnim. I was dead the moment they chose me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But you have to run. You have to go right now. You have to." The timer jumped. 015, 014, 013. The basement erupted into controlled chaos. Jae-hyun's men moved with military precision born of training and practice, hands grabbing their boss, multiple sets of arms trying to physically drag him toward the exit. But Jae-hyun fought them. Actually fought them. Throwing elbows, breaking grips, trying desperately to reach the driver. To get to Minho, to somehow fix the unfixable. "Hyungnim, go!" Minho screamed, his voice raw and breaking. Not in fear, in fury, in absolute determination, in the kind of love that made sacrifice not just possible but inevitable. "Go now." Then he threw his entire body, chair and all, bound hands and explosive vest and everything, toward the small ground-level window at the far edge of the room, the one that led to an exterior stairwell, the one that would direct the blast away, would channel it out instead of in, would turn his body into a shield one final time. He hit the glass at the exact moment the timer hit 0. What followed wasn't a sound in any normal sense. It was a sensation, a physical force that rewrote reality. A pressure wave that turned air into something solid, into a wall that hit like a freight train. Stacy felt Jae-hyun's body cover hers in the fraction of a second before impact, his weight slamming her face first into the concrete floor as the world turned white and hot and screaming. The concussion stole the oxygen from her lungs. Her eardrums felt like they'd been punched from the inside. Glass rained down like frozen tears, like diamonds, like shrapnel. Something heavy, concrete, rebar, she couldn't tell, crashed into the floor where she'd been standing 3 seconds before, close enough that she could feel the vibration through the ground. Then silence. Absolute, ringing, suffocating silence. Stacy's ears felt stuffed with cotton soaked in static. Her ribs ached where Jae-hyun's weight had driven her into the floor, where his forearm had pressed across her back, protecting her spine. She could taste copper, blood from where she'd bitten through her tongue on impact. Slowly, like a photograph developing in chemicals, the world swam back into focus. Jae-hyun was kneeling in broken glass and concrete dust and the settling debris of violence, staring at the crater where the window used to be, where Minho had thrown himself, where a human being had just chosen to become a shield, had transformed himself into something that would save the life of the man he loved like a brother. Smoke curled from the opening, thick and black, carrying the smell of burned things that used to be human. Burnt plastic, charred meat, chemical accelerant, the smell of sacrifice reduced to its base components. Jae-hyun's hands were shaking. Not a tremor. A full shake that traveled up his arms, into his shoulders. Stacy could see it even through her own shock, could recognize it as the physical manifestation of something breaking inside him. She pushed herself upright, every muscle screaming protest. Pain lanced through her shoulder where she'd hit the ground. Her palms were scraped raw, embedded with concrete dust and tiny shards of glass that caught the light. Around them, Jae-hyun's surviving men were checking themselves for wounds, patting down their own bodies with hands that trembled slightly, speaking in rapid Korean too fast and too dialect-heavy for her fragmentary understanding. But she understood tone, shock, horror, grief, the sound of men who'd just watched one of their own die to save them all. "He died to save you," Stacy said softly, moving on unsteady legs to kneel beside Jaehyun in the broken glass. The shards crunched beneath her knees, cutting through her ruined slacks, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. "He chose you, even knowing what it would cost." Jaehyun's jaw worked beneath the skin, muscles jumping like creatures trapped beneath the surface. Tendons stood out in his neck like steel cables under impossible tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of the careful control, the cultivated coldness, all the armor he usually wore. "They didn't just compromise my people," he said, and each word sounded like it was being torn out of him. "They didn't just buy them or threaten them or trick them. They weaponized their loyalty. They took the thing that makes us strongest, the bonds that hold us together, the love that makes us willing to die for each other, and they turned it into a weapon pointed at my heart." He stopped, swallowed hard enough that she could see his throat work. "Minho chose me, even with a bomb strapped to his chest, even knowing his sister might die because of it, even knowing I might not forgive him. He chose me. And you would have chosen him," Stacy said, recognizing the survivor's guilt bleeding from him like an open wound. She'd felt this same poison before, had tasted it when she'd destroyed the O'Malleys and put her own family at risk, when she'd had to choose between justice and safety. "You were fighting your own men to get to him. You would have died trying to save him, even though saving him was impossible." His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd grabbed his tie outside the obsidian, since she'd forced him to kiss her to survive, she saw past the cold mask, past the calculated violence, past the cultivated image of the dragon who ruled with fire and fear. She saw the man underneath, the one who'd lost his father to a bullet at 16 and had to become a killer to survive, the one who carried loyalty like a religion, like a sacrament, like the only thing that mattered in a world that was fundamentally alone, the one who was now watching that loyalty weaponized, watching it kill the people he loved. "They're going to kill everyone I care about," he whispered, and it was barely audible over the ringing still singing in her ears. "One by one, they're going to make me watch. They're going to make me choose who lives and who dies until there's no one left, until I'm alone with this empire built on blood." He looked at the smoking crater where his brother in arms had just evaporated. "He didn't just die for me, Stacy. He died because he believed I was worth saving. That is a debt I can never repay." Stacy reached out, her hand covering his bloodied knuckles. The contact was electric, grounding him in the chaos. "You repay it by making sure it wasn't in vain," she said, her voice fierce. "We don't just survive this, Jaehyun. We make them regret they ever learned his name. We make them wish they had died in that explosion instead of him." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the pact between them shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was vengeance shared. "Together," he whispered. "We burn them together." His expression shifted. The vulnerability, that terrible, human vulnerability, closed like a door slamming shut, like blast doors dropping, like armor sliding back into place. When he looked at her again, it was with the calculating, cold focus of a predator who just identified an asset, a weapon, a tool that might deliver salvation through violence. "You said you destroyed the O'Malleys from the inside," he said, his voice regaining its control. "Yes. Then you know how to burn an empire." It wasn't a question. It was a recognition of what she was, what she'd always been, what 3 years of hiding hadn't changed. The auditor, the woman who turned numbers into weapons. "I do," she said quietly, "and I will." The mobile command center smelled like electronics and stale coffee, and the particular tension that preceded either violence or revelation. Banks of monitors lined the walls of the retrofitted surveillance van, each screen showing different angles of the city, traffic cameras, security feeds, satellite imagery that absolutely should not have been accessible to private citizens. The gentle hum of servers created white noise that somehow made the space feel more claustrophobic. Stacy sat at one of the computer terminals, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent years making numbers confess their secrets. Lines of code scrolled past. Financial records, shell corporation registries, the digital architecture of an empire built on fear and carefully laundered money. Jae-hyun stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence like heat against her back, close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her nape when he leaned forward to read the screen. "The money trail leads back to a shell corporation registered in Delaware," she said, pulling up a cascade of interconnected accounts. "But the actual authorization signatures..." She paused, her blood turning to slush. "They're coming from inside your organization. High-level access. Someone with biometric clearance to your offshore accounts. Someone who knows your security protocols. Someone who..." "Show me." She pulled up the digital signature, the timestamp, the authorization code that required both a password and a fingerprint scan. The name that appeared on the screen made Jae-hyun's entire body go rigid. Kang Dae, the younger brother. The one who'd always preferred art galleries to territory negotiations. Who'd told their father he wanted nothing to do with the family business. Who'd been in Europe for the past 6 months, supposedly studying architecture. "No." Jae-hyun's voice was flat, dead. "He wouldn't. He's in Italy. He was in Italy." Stacy pulled up travel records she probably shouldn't have been able to access. 3 weeks ago, he returned to New York, but not through JFK, through a private airfield in New Jersey. No customs, no official record. She clicked through encrypted email fragments recovered from a server she'd backtraced through 3 proxy layers. He's working with someone external. A task force, government credentials, but the funding structure is off-book. This isn't law enforcement conducting an investigation. This is... She highlighted a series of wire transfers. "This is a sanctioned elimination. The CIA has wanted to dismantle your network for years. If your brother is handing them everything, the offshore accounts, the shipping routes, the names of every politician you've bought, they won't just arrest me," Jae-hyun finished, his voice hollow. "They'll erase me. Make it look like a gang war. Clean up the power vacuum before the other families can capitalize, eliminate the competition, and claim they're making the city safer." His hand moved, almost unconsciously, to the weapons locker mounted on the van's wall. His fingers curled around a handgun with the ease of a man who'd been holding weapons since before he could properly hold beliefs. "I'm going to kill everyone in that building," he said quietly. "No." Stacy stood, positioning herself between him and the weapons. "You go in guns blazing, you die. They're expecting that. They want you emotional. They want you reckless. That's why they killed Min-ho the way they did. To break you. To make you stop thinking and start feeling." His eyes were black ice. "Get out of my way. I memorized your routing numbers." The words hit like a physical blow. Jae-hyun froze, his hand still on the weapon. "Every offshore account," Stacy continued, her voice steady despite her heart trying to break free from her chest. "Every shell corporation, every laundering pipeline, every number sequence required to access the fortune you've spent 10 years building. It's all in here." She tapped her temple. "You walk out that door on a suicide mission, and I delete everything. I freeze your assets. I transfer your money to charity. I burn your empire to the ground before you can throw your life away." The silence stretched like razor wire. "You're blackmailing me." His voice was soft, dangerous, the kind of soft that preceded bones breaking. "I'm saving you," she corrected. "Because someone has to." He moved faster than she anticipated. One moment he was across the van. The next, his hands were slamming into the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. The weapon was forgotten. His body was a wall of heat and barely restrained fury, pressing close enough that she could count his heartbeats through the fabric of his shirt. "Why?" The word came out ragged, raw. "Why do you care if I live or die? You could take that 50,000. You could disappear again. You could be nobody and safe and far away from this. Why are you still here?" Because she saw herself in his rage. Because she recognized the particular species of grief that came from watching loyalty weaponized against you. Because when he'd covered her body with his during the explosion, some fundamental truth had clicked into place. That men who protected others before themselves were rare enough to be worth saving. Because when his mouth had crashed against hers outside the obsidian, there'd been one eternal second where it hadn't felt tactical at all. "Because you can't kill them if you're dead," she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can destroy them while you're still breathing." His eyes searched hers. This close, she could see flecks of gold in the darkness. Could see the scar tissue at the corner of his left eye where something, a blade, a bullet, had passed too close. Could feel the heat radiating off him in waves that made the small space feel incendiary. "What's your plan?" he asked finally. Stacy exhaled shakily. "You handle the blood, I'll handle the money. But we do it together, or we don't do it at all." For a long moment he didn't move. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there, then back to her eyes. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, like the moment before lightning struck. Then, slowly, he pushed away from the wall. 72 hours, he said, moving back to the monitors. His voice had shifted into something calculating. Controlled. That's how long we have before Kang Day finalizes the exchange. After that, he hands over my location to the task force, and I'm dead within 24 hours. Then we have 72 hours to make him wish he'd never been born, Stacy said, settling back into the chair. Her hands were shaking, so she placed them flat on the keyboard to still them. Pull up his travel itinerary, his credit card history, his phone records. I need to see every pattern, every routine, every place he feels safe. And then, she said, pulling up a schematic of Manhattan's financial district, we remind your brother that the thing about empires built on fear is that they burn beautifully. Jae-hyun moved to stand beside her, not behind her this time, but shoulder to shoulder. Equal. Partners. His hand brushed against hers on the keyboard, and neither of them pulled away. "One condition," he said quietly. "What?" "When this is over, I want you to tell me the real reason you're helping me." Stacy's breath caught. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. The real reason? The one you're not saying. She forced herself to keep typing, to focus on the numbers swimming across the screen, to ignore the way her skin burned where his hand touched hers. "Deal," she whispered. The New York subway system at 2 a.m. was a study in controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars, the screech of metal against metal echoing through tunnels that smelled like ozone and old secrets. Stacy pressed herself against the grimy tile wall, her heart hammering as another train roared past, close enough that she could feel the displaced air pulling at her clothes. They'd been moving locations when the ambush hit. It started with the lights going out. Systematic, like someone flipping switches in sequence. Then the first shots. Muzzle flashes painting the platform in strobe light violence. Jae-hyun had moved with lethal precision, his body positioned between her and the gunfire before her mind could process the danger. His men, 3 who'd survived Minho's death, returned fire with the efficiency of soldiers, not gangsters, but there were too many. "Go!" Jae-hyun's voice cut through the chaos. He shoved Stacy toward the tunnel entrance, his weapon spitting fire. "East Tunnel. 3rd Junction. There's a maintenance door." The words dissolved into the crack of gunfire. Stacy ran. The tunnel darkness swallowed her whole. Behind, the sounds of combat echoed like thunder trapped underground. She could hear Jae-hyun's voice. Sharp Korean commands, followed by screams that ended too abruptly. Her waitress flats slapped against wet concrete. Rats scattered from her path. The air tasted like electricity and rust. 3rd Junction, she counted in her head, trying to remember the schematic he'd shown her in the van, trying not to think about the sounds behind her that suggested people dying. Then, footsteps, running, multiple sets. Not behind her, ahead. Stacy skidded to a stop, her breath ragged. The tunnel split, left or right. In the dim emergency lighting, she could see shapes moving in the right passage. Tactical gear, professional. These weren't gang members. These were operators. She went left. The new tunnel was narrower, older. Water dripped from ceiling pipes that probably predated the city code. Her hands found the wall, using it to navigate as she half ran, half stumbled forward. The footsteps behind her multiplied. Closer. They were hurting her. The tunnel dead-ended at a maintenance platform overlooking the tracks. Stacy spun, searching for escape, and saw it. A rusted ladder leading down to the active line. Not good, but better than capture. She grabbed the first rung just as flashlight beams hit her. "Don't move." American accent. CIA then. Not Kang Dae's mercenaries. Worse. Stacy's mind calculated trajectories with the same cold precision she used for financial analysis. The latter would take 3 seconds. They could fire in 2. But if she dropped, the decision made itself. She let go, 5 feet down to the tracks. Her ankle screamed on impact, but she rolled with it, the way her father's violence had taught her to fall without breaking. The third rail hummed 6 inches from her hand. Deadly. Live. Forbidden. Stacy. Jae-hyun's voice. Distant. Desperate. She looked up and saw him burst onto the platform, his face a mask of blood and fury. His weapon was up, firing. Not at the agents, but at the lights. Plunging the platform into darkness. In that moment of confusion, Stacy ran along the tracks, following the curve of the tunnel. Her ankle protested every step. The third rail glowed faintly to her left, a red line between survival and electrocution. Then she heard it, the rumble, the vibration through the rails beneath her feet. Train. The headlight appeared around the curve, a single eye growing larger with terrifying speed. Stacy searched frantically for an alcove, a maintenance nook, anything. But this section was smooth wall and train and gunfire. From the platform, a ricochet sparked off the tunnel wall inches from her head. In the split second before the train reached her, Stacy made a choice. She dropped flat between the rails, the small pocket of space underneath the train car's belly, and prayed physics worked the way she remembered. The train passed over her like thunder made solid, wind and darkness, and the smell of hot metal and ozone. Her entire body pressed flat against the concrete, her fingers splayed against debris and rat filth, and the absolute certainty that if she lifted her head even an inch, it would separate from her shoulders. The train kept coming, car after car after car, an eternity compressed into seconds. Then, silence. Stacy lay there, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She could hear shouting above. Jae-hyun's voice, raw with something that might have been grief. She tried to move. Her legs wouldn't respond. Her vision grayed at the edges. Above, on the platform, she heard Jae-hyun scream. Not in Korean, not in English, but in the universal language of someone losing the thing they couldn't afford to lose. Then hands. Rough, dragging her from between the tracks. Not gentle, not enemy. His men, his remaining men, pulling her up as another train's rumble began in the distance. Is she alive? Barely. Move. They carried her through the tunnels, a blur of pain and darkness, and the distant sound of Jae-hyun fighting like a man with nothing left to lose. She heard one of the agents scream, heard the wet sound of a knife finding soft tissue, heard Jae-hyun's voice, cold, methodical, promising death in 2 languages. They emerged in a service tunnel that smelled like old water and institutional bleach. Someone pressed cloth against her shoulder. When had she been shot? And the pressure made her vision white out. When she came back, Jae-hyun was there. His face was covered in blood. Not his, she thought, hoped. His eyes held something she'd never seen before. Emptiness. She's alive, Hyungnim, one of the men was saying. The wound is through and through. Clean. She just needs, get her to the safe house. The real one. His voice was dead. Automated. Patch her up. I have work to do. What kind of work? Stacy managed through gritted teeth. He looked at her then, and the coldness in his eyes made her shiver. The kind that makes men beg before they die, he said quietly. They tried to kill you. They don't get to live after that. 2 weeks later, Stacy stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, her reflection sharp against the night skyline. The penthouse smelled like money. That particular mixture of expensive flowers, aged whiskey, and the subtle musk of leather furniture that cost more than most people's annual salary. Her dress was crimson silk that moved like blood when she walked. Her shoulder, healed now except for the thin scar tissue, ached with phantom pain. Behind her, champagne glasses clinked. Laughter, the performative kind that wealthy people used as armor, drifted through the space like smoke. You look stunning, Kang Dae said, approaching with 2 flutes of champagne. He was younger than Jae-hyun by 3 years, his features softer, his smile easier. Where his brother carried violence like a tailored suit, Kang Dae wore civility like camouflage. Red is definitely your color. Stacy accepted the glass with a smile that felt like broken glass in her mouth. Thank you. His hand settled on the small of her back. Possessive, proprietary, and it took everything in her not to flinch. To not think about how Jae-hyun's touch had felt nothing like this. How when Jae-hyun had put his hands on her, even in fury, there had been a question in it. A request for permission she could have denied. Kang Dae's touch assumed consent. I still can't believe my brother's famous auditor walked into my office and offered to work for me, he said, steering her toward the windows where they could see and be seen. When I heard you were dead, killed in the subway ambush, I have to admit, I was disappointed. Such a waste of talent. I'm very good at not dying, Stacy said lightly, even though her hand wanted to tremble around the champagne flute. The past 2 weeks had been the longest performance of her life. The subway fall had been real. She still had nightmares about the train passing inches above her body. But what came after had been carefully choreographed. Jae-hyun's men had smuggled her out, had faked her death using blood from her shoulder wound and a body from the city morgue, had delivered her, resurrection perfect, to Kang Dae's door with a story about survival and pragmatism and a willingness to switch sides to the winning team. And Kang Dae, arrogant with anticipated victory, had believed her. Speaking of my brother, Kang Dae continued, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I assume you know he's been on a rather destructive rampage since your death? Stacy's pulse jumped, but she kept her face neutral. I hadn't heard. Oh, it's been quite something. He sipped his champagne. 3 of my supplier warehouses burned. 5 of my allied captains found dead in their homes. He's going scorched earth. Honestly, it's almost romantic. The dragon destroying everything in grief over his little accountant. He swirled his champagne, watching the bubbles rise. Do you know what they called me growing up? The spare. Jae-hyun was the dragon, the prodigy, the king. I was just the insurance policy in case he broke. Kang Dae stepped closer, his cologne cloying compared to Jae-hyun's sharp cedar scent. But insurance policies pay out when the main asset is destroyed, he murmured, a lifetime of resentment tightening his jaw. I'm just collecting on 30 years of being second best. When he's gone, I won't be the weak brother who preferred art galleries. I'll be the man who sold the dragon to the butchers and walked away with the crown. The way he said it, mocking, diminutive, made something hot and violent coil in Stacy's chest. He'll make a mistake, she said instead. Grief makes people reckless. That's what I'm counting on. Kang Dae's smile sharpened. The task force has been very generous with resources. All I have to do is deliver Jae-hyun to them, alive or dead, and I walk away clean. New identity, relocation to Europe, $20 million in untraceable crypto. Not a bad trade for a brother who never wanted me around anyway. Stacy's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the champagne flute. She thought about the way Jae-hyun had spoken about family, about loyalty, about how the worst betrayals came from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The signing is tomorrow night, Kang Dae continued. Boardroom of the Chrysler Building. Very dramatic, very official. CIA agents, wire transfers, the whole theater of it. And you. He turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. Are going to help me make sure the financial transfers go smoothly. That's what you do, isn't it? Make numbers behave? Stacy met his eyes and let him see exactly what he wanted to see. Ambition, calculated self-interest. The survival instinct of someone who'd learned that loyalty was a luxury the hunted couldn't afford. That's exactly what I do, she said. 3 days before the subway ambush, Stacy sat in the mobile command center with Jae-hyun, staring at schematics of the city's underground system. They'd been working for 18 hours straight. The air tasted like stale coffee, and the particular exhaustion that came from knowing death was on a schedule. If something goes wrong, Jae-hyun said quietly, if we get separated, nothing will go wrong. Stacy's fingers flew across the keyboard, triple-checking the route. Stacy. His hand covered hers on the keyboard, stilling her. If something goes wrong, I need you to know there's a contingency. She looked up at him. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked human in a way that made her chest ache. What kind of contingency? The kind where you have to trust me even when everything looks like betrayal. He pulled up a file on the screen. Financial records for Kangdae's operations. My brother thinks he's being careful, but he's using his own biometric signatures for everything. If we can clone his data, his fingerprints, his retinal scan, his voice authentication, we can access everything he's trying to hide, getting close enough to clone all that would require. Getting inside his operation, Jae-hyun finished. Which means making him believe you've switched sides. The implication settled between them like a physical weight. You want me to fake my death? Stacy said slowly. And go to him. I want you to be the variable he doesn't see coming. Jae-hyun's hand was still covering hers. His thumb traced small circles against her palm, unconscious, or maybe very conscious. He'll believe you survived because you're the auditor. He'll believe you switched sides because he thinks everyone has a price. He'll keep you close because he needs someone who understands financial architecture. And when he does, I clone his biometrics, Stacy finished. And you use them to destroy him from the inside. Yes, she should have said no. Should have recognized this for what it was. A suicide mission with extra steps. But the way he was looking at her, the weight of his hand on hers, the implicit trust in even suggesting something so dangerous. We need a code word, she said instead. Something that means the plan is still active. Something you can send me that means you haven't forgotten I'm undercover. Jae-hyun thought for a moment. Then he reached up and loosened his tie, the same tie she'd grabbed outside the obsidian. He slipped it off and placed it in her hands. Keep this, he said quietly. When the time comes, when you've cloned his data and you're ready to make your move, return it to me. That's how I'll know. We need words too, Stacy whispered, winding the silk around her fingers. A signal that doesn't just mean the plan worked, but that the war is over, that we're safe. Jae-hyun looked at her, his expression softening in a way the world never saw. My father used to say peace is just the time between wars. He never believed in safety. He brushed a stray hair from her forehead. But when you're watching my back, I feel like I can finally see the horizon. So that's the code. The coast is clear. It means we made it to the other side. It means we stop running. Stacy's fingers closed around the silk. It was still warm from his body heat. And if I'm compromised, if he figures out what I'm doing, then you run, Jae-hyun said firmly. You forget this plan, forget me, and you run as far and as fast as you can. I won't blame you, but they both knew she wouldn't run. In the present, standing in Kangdae's penthouse with the traitor's hand on her back, Stacy felt the absence of that tie like a missing limb. She'd hidden it in a safety deposit box in Queens. Insurance and promise and the only tangible proof that somewhere in this city, Jae-hyun was preparing to burn the world. She just had to survive long enough to hand it back to him. Through the window's reflection, she watched Kangdae accept congratulations from the CIA agents, pretending to be private investors. Watched him laugh at their jokes, comfortable in his betrayal. Watched him touch her shoulder like she was property he'd acquired. Tomorrow night, in the boardroom of the Chrysler building, she would stand beside him, would place her hand on his shoulder the same way she'd adjusted Jae-hyun's tie, would use the cloning device hidden in the ring on her finger to copy his biometric data, and then she would return what she'd been holding in trust. 24 hours, she thought. Just survive 24 more hours. Behind her, Kangdae laughed at something one of the agents said. The sound was warm, human, completely devoid of the understanding that he was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. The boardroom of the Chrysler building smelled like filtered air, and the particular sterility of spaces designed to witness transactions that would ruin lives. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealed Manhattan spread below like a circuit board, lights flickering in patterns that suggested commerce and life, and all the mundane activities that continued whether empires burned or not. The conference table was polished to mirror brightness, reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead in ways that made everyone look slightly corpse-like, slightly unreal. Stacy stood at Kangdae's left shoulder, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, her body positioned exactly where a trusted advisor would stand. The crimson dress she wore, silk that moved like blood, that caught light like fresh wounds, had been his choice. A declaration of ownership, a statement that the auditor now belonged to him, that even legends could be bought if you found the right price. Her fingers were steady, Had to be. The ring on her right index finger. Platinum band set with a single black diamond that Kang Dae had given her yesterday as a welcome to the winning team gift. Concealed a biometric scanner so sophisticated it could clone fingerprints from casual touch, retinal patterns from reflected light, voice signatures from ambient conversation. Technology that cost more than most people made in a lifetime, purchased with money stolen from his brother's accounts. Irony had a particular taste. Like copper. Like betrayal. Across the table, 3 men in suits that screamed federal salary sat with the false casualness of predators pretending to be domesticated. CIA, according to the intelligence Jae-hyun had gathered, but not official CIA, the kind that operated in spaces between congressional oversight and plausible deniability, the kind that made people disappear and called it national security. Kang Dae was signing documents, page after page of legal language that amounted to a single transaction. His brother's location, his organization's structure, everything required to dismantle the Gumryong Empire in exchange for 20 million in cryptocurrency, immunity from prosecution, and a new identity in Portugal. He looked pleased with himself, proud even, like a man who'd just solved a complex problem through clever negotiation rather than fratricide. Just the final signature, one of the agents said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Then we transfer the funds and you're free to disappear, Mr. Sun. Kang Dae reached for the pen. Expensive, probably a gift, probably meaningless, and Stacy's hand slid from the chair back to his shoulder, just a gentle touch. The kind of gesture that suggested support, solidarity, shared victory. The ring made contact with the biometric scanner hidden in his lapel pin. The one he wore every day because it was the access key to his personal accounts, his insurance policy, his golden parachute. 3 seconds of contact, that's all the scanner needed. The device vibrated once against her finger. Confirmation. Stacy's heart was a war drum in her chest, but her face remained serene, composed. The mask she'd worn for 2 weeks, playing the survivor, the pragmatist, the woman who chose winning over loyalty, was so perfect now that she almost believed it herself. Almost. Then the boardroom doors opened. Jae-hyun entered alone. Unarmed. His hands were empty, raised slightly in a gesture of surrender, but he was covered in blood. Not his own, judging by the way he moved. Fluid, unhurt, dangerous. The blood was spray pattern across his white shirt, his face, matting his hair at the temples. He looked like he'd walked through a slaughterhouse. Looked like he'd become the thing that made slaughterhouses necessary. The CIA agents stood instantly, weapons appearing in hands with the speed of training and paranoia. Kang Dae pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against polished floor, his face draining of color. Hyung, he started, his voice cracking. Brother, Jae-hyun said softly, and the word was a condemnation. I believe you have something that belongs to me. We have an agreement with Mr. Sun, one of the agents said, his weapon trained on Jae-hyun's chest. You're not welcome here. Leave now or what? Jae-hyun's smile was terrible. Empty. You'll shoot me? Please. I've been shot 4 times today already. I barely notice anymore. He took a step forward. The agents tensed. Fingers moved toward triggers. The air itself felt like it was holding its breath. That's when Stacy moved. Her hand, still resting on Kang Dae's shoulder, shifted. Just slightly. Just enough to activate the cloned biometric data. Her other hand produced a small tablet from her clutch, fingers dancing across the screen with the speed of practice and muscle memory. The screens behind the conference table, mounted displays meant for presentations and video conferences, all turned red simultaneously. Account numbers scrolled past. Transaction histories. Wire transfer protocols executing in real time. What? Kang Dae spun to look at the screens, then at Stacy. What did you do? I'm the auditor, she said quietly, stepping away from him, putting distance between herself and the man who'd thought he owned her. I remember numbers. I see patterns. And your biometric security? She held up the ring, let him see the tiny scanner embedded in the stone. It's impressive. Was impressive. Past tense. The screens showed it all. Every account Kang Dae had accumulated. The CIA bribe money, his personal fortune, the assets he'd stolen from Jae-hyun's organization, draining. transferring, disappearing into routing sequences that would take forensic accountants months to untangle, if they ever could. Destination account. Jae-hyun's personal holdings. No, Kang-dae whispered, his hands scrambling for his phone, trying to stop the hemorrhaging of his entire financial life. No, no, no. The CIA agents realized it simultaneously. The color drained from their faces as they understood what Stacy's smile meant. No money meant no payment. No payment meant no leverage. No leverage meant they'd just committed multiple federal crimes for a payoff that had evaporated like smoke. You. One of them swung his weapon toward Stacy. Jae-hyun moved, not toward Stacy, toward the agent. The distance closed in heartbeats. The weapon discharged, once, twice. But Jae-hyun was already inside the man's guard, his hand closing around the agent's throat with the pressure of someone who knew exactly how much force it took to crush a windpipe without killing immediately, how to make someone regret pulling a trigger without granting them the mercy of quick death. The other agents turned their weapons on Jae-hyun, but Stacy was already moving. She crossed the space to Jae-hyun's side, pulled something from her clutch. Not a weapon, a phone, and showed them the screen. "I've been documenting everything," she said, her voice steady. "Every meeting, every transaction, every crime you've committed while wearing federal badges. It's all backed up to 3 separate servers, with automated release protocols if anything happens to either of us. You can shoot us both, but in 12 hours, every news organization in the country gets the full story of how the CIA tried to use organized crime to justify increased budgets and expanded powers." One of the agents, older, with scars that suggested fieldwork rather than desk duty, lowered his weapon slowly. "We could still kill you. You could?" Jae-hyun agreed, his hand still around the first agent's throat. "But then you'd have to explain to your superiors why the operation failed, why your team is dead, why the media has proof of your crimes." Or, he released the choking man, who collapsed, gasping. "You could walk away, disappear, retire quietly, forget this ever happened." The older agent looked at his team, looked at Kang-dae, who was still staring at the screens in horror as his fortune completed its disappearing act, looked at Stacy, who held his career in her hand disguised as a phone. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes," Jae-hyun corrected gently. "It is." The agents backed toward the door. Slowly, weapons still drawn but not aimed. Self-preservation winning over pride. The door closed behind them with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken 3 weeks and too many bodies to write. Kang-dae was still at the table, his hands shaking, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, and the particular despair of someone who'd just lost everything. "You were dead," he said to Stacy. "I saw the reports. You were dead. I got better," she replied. Then she reached into her clutch one final time and produced something that made Jae-hyun's expression shift. Not soften, exactly, but change into something almost vulnerable. His tie. The one she'd grabbed outside the obsidian. The one she'd used to save his life. The one he'd given her in the mobile command center 3 weeks ago with instructions to return it when the job was done. She crossed to him, her heels clicking on polished floor, and reached up to loop it around his neck. His hands came up automatically to help, to adjust, but she batted them away gently. This was hers to do. "The coast is clear," she murmured, tying the Windsor knot with the same precision she'd used that first night. His hand settled on her waist. Warm, steady, possessive in a way that felt nothing like Kang-dae's touch, and everything like coming home. "It always is," he said quietly, "when you're watching." Behind them, Kang-dae made a sound. Broken. Defeated. But neither of them turned to acknowledge it. The brother was already irrelevant. Already erased. The FBI, the real FBI, not the corrupt agents playing games, would arrive within the hour. Stacy had sent them everything they needed to prosecute, to dismantle whatever was left of Kang-dae's half-formed empire. Some betrayals deserved the cold mercy of law rather than the hot satisfaction of violence. "Ready to go home?" Jae-hyun asked. Stacy adjusted the tie one final time, smoothing it flat against his blood-spattered shirt. "Where's home? Anywhere you are," he said, and meant it. The distance between deciding to leave and actually leaving, amounted to precisely 47 steps across polished marble, 3 elevator rides, and one final moment where Stacy looked back at the boardroom and saw Kang Dae still sitting at the table, staring at empty screens that displayed his ruin. She felt nothing. Not pity. Not triumph. Just the hollow satisfaction of an equation balanced, of numbers finally adding up the way they should. Then Jae-hyun's hand found hers, and they walked out of the Chrysler Building into Manhattan twilight that smelled like rain and exhaust, and the particular electricity of a city that never stopped moving, never stopped consuming, never stopped offering chances to become someone new. The street was chaos, evening traffic, pedestrians, the ambient noise of 8 million people living their lives. But Jae-hyun's security had created a bubble of space around the entrance. 4 vehicles, 12 men, enough firepower to start a small war if necessary. Expecting trouble? Stacy asked. Always, Jae-hyun replied, but hoping for peace. They made it to the lead vehicle when Stacy saw it. The flash, red laser light dancing across the rear windshield, then tracking toward Jae-hyun's back. The same signature, the same angle, the same intention as 3 weeks ago outside the Obsidian, the sniper from the beginning. Still out there, still hunting. "Get down!" she screamed, her body moving before her mind completed the thought, tackling Jae-hyun sideways as the first round punched through where his spine had been seconds before. Glass exploded. Someone shouted. The security team erupted into coordinated chaos, creating a human shield while trying to identify the shooter's position. Jae-hyun's body covered hers immediately, reversing their positions, his weight pressing her into the pavement. "Where?" he demanded. "Rooftop, east side, 8 floors up, corner office." Her mind calculated angles, trajectories, wind drift. "He's got maybe 10 seconds before your team triangulates." "He'll take another shot," Jae-hyun said, his voice absolutely calm despite everything. Professional snipers always fire twice. Confirmation kill. Stacy's hand closed around something cold on the ground, the fallen carbine of a security team member who'd been hit in the initial chaos. She'd refused guns for 3 weeks, had watched Jae-hyun's men carry these short-barreled rifles with the casual familiarity of people who understood that in their world, pistols were for show, but rifles were for work. But she'd learned to shoot, a lifetime ago, when her father had taught her everything about weapons, because he wanted his daughter to understand what she should fear. Later, when the FBI had trained her before her testimony, teaching her to protect herself because the cartel's reach was long and their memory longer. "Give me the rifle," she said. "You said you didn't." I lied. "Now give me the goddamn rifle and move on 3. Something in her voice made him obey. He passed the weapon, heavier than a handgun, cold steel and polymer, into her hands and rolled left, creating space. She checked the chamber with a muscle memory she hadn't used in years. Stacy came up on one knee, the weapon already rising, her breathing already controlled. She could see the rooftop, could see the reflection of city lights on scope glass, could see the shadow of a man prone behind a rifle, probably already adjusting his aim, probably already squeezing the trigger for that second confirmation shot. The laser sight found Jae-hyun's head. Centered. Perfect kill shot. Stacy fired. Stacy fired. The stock kicked against her shoulder, the recoil sharper and louder than a handgun. The sound was enormous, the crack of the high-velocity rounds echoing off the canyon of buildings and making her ears ring. The glass wall of the building between them and the sniper spider-webbed but didn't shatter. Bulletproof. Of course it was bulletproof. She fired again. Same point of impact. The glass starred further. Third shot. The glass gave way, collapsing inward in a cascade that sounded like the sky breaking. She didn't hesitate. She didn't try to aim for a single perfect shot. She knew the sniper would move the instant he saw a muzzle flash. Instead, she unleashed a controlled, rapid-fire volley, crack, 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 aiming slightly high. The first 2 rounds pulverized the tempered glass of the office window, turning the bulletproof barrier into a cloud of falling dust. The 3rd and 4th rounds followed the path of the first 2 milliseconds later, punching through the open breach before the sniper could even flinch. It wasn't about accuracy. It was about volume and velocity outpacing human reaction time. The laser sight disappeared. Silence. Then shouting. Then sirens. Real ones this time. NYPD responding to reports of gunfire in Midtown. Jae-hyun's security team was already moving, pulling them both toward the vehicles, creating the exit strategy that would get them away before the police arrived and started asking questions that had no good answers. In the back of the Mercedes, different car, same leather smell, same sense of borrowed safety. Stacy's hands finally started shaking. The gun sat in her lap, safety engaged, slide locked back on an empty magazine. "You killed him," Jae-hyun said quietly. "Not a question. An observation. Maybe. Probably. I don't know." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I couldn't let him kill you." His hand covered hers, warm and steady and real. "Thank you. For which part? The shooting or the not letting you die?" "Both. All of it. Everything." He squeezed gently. "For seeing the signal 3 weeks ago. For trusting me enough to fake your death. For coming back. For finishing this." Stacy leaned her head against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "What happens now?" "Now?" His arm came around her, pulling her closer. "Now we disappear. Really disappear. Not like you did for 3 years, hiding in plain sight. Actually gone. New identities, new city, new everything. And your organization will survive without me. Or it won't. Either way, I'm done." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I'm done watching people I love die. I'm done with empires built on blood. I'm done with all of it except you." The car drove through the city, heading toward an airport that probably wasn't JFK, toward a plane that probably wasn't on any flight manifest, toward a future that was vast and uncertain and terrifying in the way that freedom always was when you'd been caged for so long you'd forgotten what wings felt like. 3 years later, Seoul was raining, light spring rain that smelled like cherry blossoms and possibility. The apartment was modern minimalism, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Han River. Expensive but not ostentatious. Comfortable but not extravagant. The kind of place where a legitimate businessman and his wife would live, where a financial consultant and her husband would build a life that had nothing to do with dead men or empires or the weight of choices that could never be unmade. Stacy stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress for the charity gala they were attending tonight. Something for children's literacy, organized by Seoul's expatriate business community. The kind of event where they'd drink champagne and make small talk and pretend they'd always been the people they were pretending to be now. Behind her, Jae-hyun emerged from the bedroom wearing a tuxedo that fit him like it had been grown there. Like he'd been born in formal wear. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his collar in that way that suggested he'd tried and failed, and was now resigned to asking for help. "I still can't do these properly," he said, approaching her with that small smile that was reserved only for her, only for moments when they were alone and could drop the masks they wore for the rest of the world. Stacy turned to face him, reaching up to take the ends of the tie in her hands. Silk. Cool, the same texture as that first night, though this tie was navy instead of black. "You're the head of the biggest legitimate shipping company in South Korea," she said, her fingers working the Windsor knot with muscle memory. "You employ 3,000 people, and you can't tie a tie." "I don't need to," he replied, his hand settling on her waist. "I have you." She smoothed the finished knot, then let her hands rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric, steady, calm, alive. "The coast is clear," she murmured, the code phrase that had once meant the plan was still active, that they were still on the same side, that trust still held despite everything trying to tear it apart. "It always is," Jae-hyun said, pulling her closer. "When you're watching." From the living room came the sound of laughter. High-pitched, delighted, pure. Their daughter, Ji-yeon, named for Minho's sister, who they'd found and saved, who visited every month and called Stacy Unni, playing with blocks on the carpet. 3 years old, dark hair and pigtails. Her mother's eyes and her father's smile and a future that stretched ahead of her untainted by the blood that had bought her existence. "Ready?" Stacy asked. "Always," Jae-hyun replied, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with charity galas and everything to do with the life they'd built from the ashes of the people they used to be. They walked into the living room together. Ji-yeon looked up and squealed, "Appa? Aoma?" and ran toward them with the absolute trust of a child who'd never known fear, never known loss, never known that her parents were anything other than boring business people who told her bedtime stories and checked under the bed for monsters that were imaginary instead of real. Stacy picked her up, held her close, breathed in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. Jaehyun's arm came around them both, creating a circle that was whole and complete and perfect in ways that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with survival. Outside, Seoul continued its evening rhythm. Rain fell. The river flowed. The city lived and breathed and moved forward without knowing or caring about the dragon who'd walked away from his empire, or the auditor who'd burned one dynasty to save another. And in an apartment overlooking it all, 3 people who'd been forged in violence and tempered in blood played with building blocks and laughed and prepared for a gala where they'd drink champagne and be boring. It was everything. It was enough. It was salvation, disguised as ordinary life. And when Stacy adjusted Jaehyun's tie one more time before they left, a gesture that had started as survival and transformed into love, she felt the weight of everything they'd survived, everyone they'd lost, every choice that had led them here. The coast was clear. Finally, completely, forever. She was watching. He was safe. They were home.